On my wedding day, right in front of 120 guests, my mother clinked her wine glass, smiled, and announced that I was adopted. Just like that. No warning, no grace, just truth weaponized. Hi, I'm Lena. I'm the bride who didn't cry during her mother's toast, but did cry hours later in a driveway, realizing the woman who raised me might never have truly chosen me. But what no one expected. I had already taken a DNA test, and I wasn't the one who'd been switched at birth. So who was? And why would a mother lie like that? Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. The dress felt stiff against my spine, like it belonged to someone else's story. I turned slightly in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman looking back at me. Layers of lace and satin shimmered beneath the vanity lights, but I felt nothing. No excitement, no butterflies. Just a quiet ache, lodged deep and unmoving. Mom had cried at every fitting, not the joyful kind of tears either, the sharp, stingy ones that came when she insisted something had to be altered, corrected, controlled. Never once did she say, "You look beautiful. Just stand up straight." Her voice in my ear every time the seamstress took in a hem or tightened the corset. Naomi came up behind me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "That neckline's gonna leave a mark," she murmured, tugging slightly at the stiff lace near my collarbone. "Do you want me to grab the tailor?" I shook my head. "It's fine." "You don't look fine." She met my eyes in the mirror. Naomi had always been able to read me better than anyone, which is why I avoided looking at her too long right then. I wasn't ready for the questions I knew she wouldn't ask out loud. Behind us, Aunt Marie sat in the corner near the garment rack, quietly sipping pumpkin spice coffee from a paper cup. Her eyes never left me, but she didn't say a word. That was her way. Present, observing, always just a breath away from saying something profound or breaking the silence. A bridesmaid laughed somewhere across the room. Someone else sprayed setting mist in the air, the scent floral and synthetic. The bridal suite buzzed like a beehive dressed in tulle and nerves. Outside, the wind had picked up. I could see red and yellow leaves tumbling across the gravel path that led to the chapel. Autumn in Pennsylvania could feel like a fairy tale if you squinted just right. But there was nothing magical about the way I kept tugging at my sleeves, trying to make the dress feel like mine. Mom had insisted on this one, said it was timeless, elegant. A Whitmore woman's kind of gown. It was high-necked and cinched at the waist, with pearl buttons trailing down the back. It was beautiful, and it felt like a costume. Naomi knelt to adjust the hem. "Do you remember the first dress you liked? The one with the open back and the slit?" I nodded slowly. She called it too modern. Naomi didn't reply. She didn't need to. A silence settled in. Then Mom swept into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like punctuation. She looked immaculate, of course, silver blue dress pressed to perfection, her updo barely moving as she leaned in to kiss my cheek, leaving no trace of lipstick. "You'll want to blot again," she said, nodding toward the makeup artist. I looked at her hands. One held her phone, the other a small white envelope. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Mom turned to the room, smoothing her skirt as if we were all here for a photo op. 15 minutes, ladies. Let's make it look effortless." I caught her eye just before she turned. "Everything okay?" She smiled, tight and unreadable. "Let's not pretend today is just about fairy tales, Lena." That was all she said before she walked out. I felt the tension roll through me like a slow shiver. Naomi stood up, brushing invisible dust from her dress. "She's been off all morning," she said carefully. "Do you think she's planning something?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe that today, of all days, she wouldn't pull focus, wouldn't make it about her version of the truth. But I couldn't lie to Naomi. So I just exhaled and looked down at my hands, now twisted together in my lap. There had always been gaps in the stories my parents told me. Missing baby pictures, lost medical files, birthday timelines that didn't add up. I used to ask about it. When I was 8, I asked Mom why my baby book didn't have any photos before I turned 2. She said the album got water damaged in a move. I asked why I didn't have a birth certificate from the hospital like Jason did. She said mine got reissued after a clerical error. I stopped asking around age 12. Now I could feel it all bubbling under the lace, decades of half answers and sideways glances. Naomi reached for my bouquet. "Let's head out. You ready?" As we stepped into the hallway, the hum of chatter from guests filtered through the chapel doors. My heart pounded in time with my footsteps. Bridesmaids floated ahead like swans, whispering and fixing curls. Just before the music cued, I turned to Naomi and whispered, "If anything weird happens, don't let me cry until the cake's cut." She gave a half smile, her hand resting lightly on my elbow. "Deal." And then the doors opened. The barn glowed like a postcard. Strings of warm Edison bulbs hung low across the wooden beams, casting soft halos over the heads of guests sipping cider sangria and laughing about who cried hardest during the vows. Someone had set up a photo corner in front of a wall of dried corn stalks, and people lined up to pose with flannel blankets and fake mustaches on sticks. The chalkboard easel near the cake table read in swooping white letters, "The Whitmore-Lennox Union, a love rooted in autumn." I sat at the head table with David, my new husband, his fingers lightly curled around mine under the cloth. I should have been taking it all in, the joy, the glow, the relief of making it through the ceremony. Instead, I kept watching my mother. Evelyn was the picture of grace. Dark plum dress, hair in a chignon so tight it might have been lacquered in place. She moved from table to table, complimenting centerpieces she'd chosen herself, hugging relatives she barely tolerated. Every move was deliberate, every word rehearsed. Her glass of red wine stayed untouched. "She's tense," Naomi whispered beside me. "She keeps checking her phone." I nodded slightly. I'd noticed the same thing. "I thought the hard part was over," I murmured. Naomi gave me a sideways glance. "With your mom, it's never over." The toast started just before sunset. Jason went first, offering a short, slightly awkward speech that made me smile. He told a story about the time I sprained my ankle in college and made him drive 6 hours to bring me homemade soup. "She's bossy," he said, raising his glass, "but she's loyal." That was Jason, short on words, but never mean. David's best man told a few safe, sentimental stories about their time in law school. My college roommate talked about how David cried during a rom-com once and tried to hide it with popcorn. People laughed. Glasses clinked. The barn felt like it was holding its breath in a warm, happy sigh. And then my mother stood. She tapped her wine glass with the side of her fork. Twice. Not hard. Just enough. The kind of sound that makes every other sound in the room go quiet. I didn't move, but my stomach tightened. David's hand shifted slightly in mine. Evelyn walked toward the small wooden stage we'd set up next to the dessert table. She climbed the 2 short steps in silence, adjusted the mic just a little, and looked directly at me. "Tonight," she said, "is not just a celebration. It's a moment of truth." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or brace. "When Lena was little, I used to tell her fairy tales," she continued. "Stories about where she came from, how she belonged to us in every possible way. I told myself those stories too." I felt the room tilt. "Because the truth," she said, her voice unwavering, "was more complicated. Lena wasn't born to us. She was adopted." Gasps rippled through the room like wind through dry corn. My chest locked. My vision tunneled. My fork slipped off my plate with a soft clatter I couldn't hear. "She has always been our daughter," Evelyn said, turning to face the guests now. "We raised her. We loved her. We gave her everything. But some things deserve to be acknowledged, not hidden." David leaned toward me, lips barely moving. "Did you know?" I shook my head. Naomi stood up fast, her chair scraping behind her. Jason sat frozen, his eyes locked on the tablecloth. Aunt Marie, across the way, dropped her fork with a sharp clang and pressed her napkin to her lips. Evelyn raised her glass, perfectly composed. "To new beginnings," she said. And then she smiled. I stood, not in a rush, not with a tremble. Slowly, as if my body had decided the moment needed to be upright, to be present, to not be drowned. I walked toward the stage. The music had stopped. The chatter had vanished. All that remained was the sound of my heels on the floorboards and the faint rustle of a napkin being folded, again and again, by someone who didn't know what else to do. My mother didn't move as I approached. She didn't lower the mic. She didn't step back. I stood just below her, close enough to see the slight pulse in her throat. "You planned this," I said, my voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Her smile didn't falter. "Truth is freeing." I stepped back, turned, walked calmly to Naomi and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Bring the folder." Naomi's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" I nodded once. The barn held its breath. People looked at each other, waiting for someone to explain, to wrap the moment in a neat bow, to move on to cake or dancing or anything less terrifying than silence. But I didn't sit back down. I stood by the head table and watched Naomi move toward the coat check, her steps brisk and certain. I looked out at the room. These guests, these people I'd grown up around. Some of them had watched me blow out candles. Some had held me after I scraped my knees. Others barely knew me but felt entitled to my history now. The barn lights flickered once. A breeze crept in through the open doors, rustling the garlands. A caramel apple rolled gently off a centerpiece and hit the floor with a soft thunk. I didn't flinch. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the part where I started telling it myself. Naomi pressed the folder into my hands, her grip steady, mine anything but. The barn had gone quiet. Too quiet for a wedding, too quiet for comfort. I could hear someone breathing hard near the dessert table. I could feel the weight of every eye fixed on me, waiting. The envelope flap was already loosened. I didn't have to rip anything open, just slide the contents out and decide whether to speak or stay silent. I chose to speak. "I mailed the kit 6 months ago," I said, turning slowly toward the center of the room. "Sunday afternoon. I sat in the car outside the post office, shaking so badly I almost dropped the box. And you know what I told myself? I told myself I was being paranoid." I opened the folder, pulling out the first sheet. "This is a certified test result, paternity and maternity. For Lena Whitmore, I held it up for people to see. Not that anyone could read it from their seats, but I needed them to see it existed. It says Evelyn and Frank Whitmore are my biological parents." A rustle of murmurs moved through the room like leaves in the wind. Someone dropped a glass. In the corner, Aunt Marie placed her hand over her mouth. David stiffened beside me, not moving, not breathing. Evelyn didn't speak, but her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles pulse. Jason stood halfway, then dropped back into his chair like something had knocked the wind out of him. I reached into the folder again. "But that's not the only thing I found," I said. There was a second page, a record from Calhoun General Hospital, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Same day, same time, 2 babies, 2 families. I held up a small photo, grainy but clear, a hospital baby bracelet with the name Maya Caldwell printed in blue letters. The birth date matched mine. The room number matched my file. Evelyn looked at the photo like it was a snake. "There was no adoption," I said, my voice low but clear. "At least not of me." Frank still hadn't opened his eyes. Naomi stepped just behind my shoulder like a shadow ready to shield if needed. I took a breath, one of those long, slow ones that hurt a little going in. "This wasn't a confession," I said to the room. "It was a cover-up." Gasps again. Not loud ones, but shocked exhales, sharp intakes, the kind people make when a movie takes a turn they didn't expect. Evelyn stood frozen at her table, one hand resting on her wine glass. The other, I noticed, had balled into a tight fist in her lap. David turned to me finally. "Who is that?" he asked, eyes flicking to the photo in my hand. "Maya," I said simply. "The girl whose name was on my wristband before someone switched it." The Edison bulbs above us flickered, just once, but long enough for me to notice the one above. My mother dimmed a little more than the rest. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe some part of the universe understood what was happening and decided to play along. I didn't wait for someone else to speak. I didn't wait for Evelyn to explain. I walked toward the small stage and left the folder on the microphone stand, like evidence at a courtroom trial. I turned back to Naomi and said quietly, "It's time to find Maya." She nodded, already one step ahead of me. Behind us, the guests stayed seated. No one clapped. No one laughed. A few people stared at their phones, pretending not to look. Most just stared at me like I was a riddle with no good answer. As I reached the edge of the barn, I heard the faint rustle of my dress, the creak of wood underfoot, and, barely, a stifled sob from the corner where Evelyn still sat, her back rigid, her world beginning to tilt. I didn't turn around. Some moments don't deserve an encore. I didn't cry during the toast, or when Evelyn said the word adopted, like it was a flaw in the fabric of who I was. I didn't cry when she lifted her glass like it was just another celebration and not the shattering of the ground beneath my feet. But I cried in the driveway the next morning, when my father turned his face to the rain instead of to me. The Whitmore house looked exactly as it always had. White shutters, perfect lawn, ceramic pumpkins lining the porch. It had never looked like a place where secrets could rot under the floorboards. But then again, rot is quiet. Inside, everything smelled like lavender and lemon polish. The kitchen counter held an untouched tray of leftover hors d'oeuvres, neatly wrapped in plastic wrap. There were no congratulations cards out, no bouquets, just silence and too much space between chairs. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. She didn't look up when I entered, just said, "I assume you're here to be angry." "I'm here to get answers." She stirred her tea with a silver spoon, tap, tap, tap. I suppose I could have waited a few more days, but what difference would that have made? A secret kept too long starts to grow teeth. "You lied." Her eyes finally met mine. "We raised you. We fed you, clothed you, put you through school. Does that mean nothing because of a technicality?" It wasn't a technicality. It was my life. From the corner, Aunt Marie cleared her throat softly. She sat without touching her tea, her hands folded over a cloth napkin. She didn't speak, just watched. Frank stood by the back door, his arms crossed. It was raining again, a thin drizzle sliding down the glass pane. He didn't turn around. "Dad?" I said. He didn't answer. "Dad," I repeated softer. Still nothing. Evelyn shifted in her seat. "He's not good with confrontation." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but because the sentence was so clean, so easy. Like that's all betrayal needed, good intentions and a discomfort with raised voices. "I needed the truth years ago," I said. "You knew that. We didn't think you'd ever find out." "Because you shredded everything?" I asked. She flinched, just a little, but I saw it. She stood, pushing the chair back carefully. "I think you should leave." For a second, I didn't move. Then I turned and walked out. It wasn't until I reached my car that I let my hand shake against the wheel. The driveway blurred through a fresh wave of tears, and still, Frank never opened the door. Later that evening, Naomi drove me to Jason's apartment on the edge of town. It smelled like cinnamon and takeout, books piled unevenly on every surface. His dog, a shaggy mutt named Calvin, sniffed my shoe before retreating to his bed with a huff. Jason met me in the parking lot first, standing near a street lamp with both hands in his pockets. He looked like someone who'd practiced this moment 100 times but still hadn't found the right script. "I was 19, he said before I even spoke. "I found the court documents in Mom's office. They were from the hospital, Calhoun General. Error log, May 1993. My chest tightened. She caught me reading them, he continued. Said if I ever mentioned it, she'd cut me out of the family. Said I didn't understand what was at stake. You didn't think I deserved to know? I was scared, Lena. I thought maybe I was wrong, or maybe you were better off not knowing. I stared at him. Do you remember the name Maya Caldwell? His face went still. Then slowly he nodded. Yeah. I saw it in one of the emails he turned and motioned for me to follow. Upstairs, he pulled an old shoebox from the top of his closet, brushing off dust. Inside, receipts, warranty cards, a cassette tape labeled Spring Formal 2008, and at the bottom, a folded sheaf of printed emails. He handed them to me without a word. I flipped through them, heart hammering. Subject line, NICU Identification Correction Request. The recipient, Maya.Caldwell93@edmail.com. Why would she email Maya? I whispered. She didn't, not directly. It was part of a forwarded thread she probably thought she deleted, but she'd printed them. I guess maybe part of her wanted to remember. Or maybe she just wanted control of the story. From the doorway, Naomi's voice broke the quiet. I found her. We both turned. Naomi held up her laptop. Maya Caldwell teaches biology, lives in Carlisle. She turned the screen to show me a faculty profile. The photo was small and slightly outdated, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The slope of her nose, the shape of her eyes. She looked like Evelyn. It felt like the world took one deep breath and held it. I sat down hard on Jason's couch, pressing my hands together like a prayer I hadn't meant to make. She was never meant to know, I whispered. Naomi came to stand beside me, one hand resting on my shoulder. Jason sat across, quiet, watchful. And somewhere far away, Evelyn Whitmore was probably shredding paper under the kitchen light, casting long, broken shadows onto a floor she kept spotless. I didn't know what I expected when I walked into that cafe just outside Carlisle. Maybe a sense of recognition, a strange jolt of familiarity. Some part of me thought I'd see my mirror image, some version of myself in a different outfit, a different life. But Maya didn't look like me. She looked like my mother. She was already seated when I arrived, tucked into a corner booth with her back to the windows. The cafe was warm, the kind of cozy that wrapped around your shoulders like a blanket. Wood-paneled walls, quiet jazz humming overhead, the scent of espresso and citrus hanging in the air. Outside, wind swept leaves across the pavement in little spirals, as if even the season couldn't sit still. Maya wore a dark green sweater, no makeup, her hair in a low braid. She wasn't reading or scrolling through her phone, just watching the room with eyes that flicked too quickly, like she didn't quite trust it. Naomi sat 2 tables away, pretending to be absorbed in a book. We'd agreed she'd stay close, just in case. I walked up slowly and stopped a foot from her table. Maya. She looked up, studied me, and didn't smile. I'm Lena, I said. I figured. I sat across from her. A waitress appeared, poured water, and left a menu, though I didn't touch it. Maya waited until we were alone again before speaking. Look, she said, if this is some ancestry scam, I'm not interested. I pulled the envelope from my coat pocket and placed it gently on the table between us. No flourish, no explanation, just the evidence. She stared at it for a second, then slowly reached for it. Inside were the DNA results, the photo of the baby bracelet and a photocopy of the NICU records. The same files I'd shown at the wedding, now worn at the corners from being handled too many times in too few days. Maya flipped through the pages. Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly on the edges of the paper. I found that photo in my mom's file drawer, I said. She had your bracelet. From the hospital, Maya looked up sharply. You're sure it's mine? Born May 14th, 1993, Calhoun General. Same room, same hour. She exhaled slowly. I always felt like I didn't quite fit, like a borrowed book on the wrong shelf. Her voice was steady, but something behind it cracked just a little. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked past me like she was talking to the air. My childhood wasn't bad, she added, just incomplete, no baby albums. My mom always said she lost everything in a flood, but there were no signs of flood damage in the house, not a stain. I nodded. Mine said the same, only it was a house fire. That never happened. We were both quiet for a while. The waitress brought 2 slices of lemon loaf we hadn't ordered. Naomi's doing, probably. I took a bite I didn't taste. They didn't just lie to me, I said finally. They erased you. Maya's lips parted. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. Or erased us both. She reached out and touched the bracelet photo again. Just once. Like she needed to feel its weight. I watched her tilt her head slightly, and something inside me flinched. Evelyn did that. When she was disappointed. When she was pretending she wasn't. But Maya's tilt didn't look disappointed in me. It looked disappointed in the world. She cleared her throat. I need time. I mean, this isn't just some shared baby photo. This is... I know. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was something quieter, deeper, like 2 threads that had finally realized they came from the same fabric. As she stood to leave, Maya paused beside my chair. If I had your mother, she said, I don't know who I'd be. I just know I wouldn't be me. And then she was gone. That night, long after I'd crawled into bed, my phone buzzed with a voice message, just under a minute long. I listened to it twice before saving it. Her voice sounded steadier than mine ever had in moments like this. My mom always knew, Maya said. She told me once, when I was 16, that she didn't ask questions because she didn't want to know the answers. I thought she meant about my father, but now I think she meant everything. The message ended with a breath. That kind you take when you're about to break, but don't. I stared at the ceiling, my hands folded over my chest, and that's when I heard the knock at the front door. 3 soft taps, then silence. I slipped into the hallway, pulled on a sweater, and opened the door to the chill of night. On the welcome mat sat a plain white envelope. No name, no return address, just my name written in a familiar hand. I carried it to the kitchen table where the overhead light cast shadows across the wood grain. Inside, on thick ivory paper, was a note in Evelyn's script. It began, "There are things I did that I can't explain. Only confess." And just like that, the story shifted again. Her handwriting surprised me. Delicate, curved, like someone who wanted every word to hurt softly. A careful cruelty, pressed gently into the page with a pen I recognized from the kitchen drawer. The letter was short, only 1 page. It didn't start with "Dear Lena" or end with "Love, Mom," just confession, wrapped in ink. She wrote that the hospital had called about an identification discrepancy in the NICU, that the nurse on duty had realized the mix-up too late, that there had been a choice not to pursue it, not to make it public, not to invite lawyers or shame or scandal. "There was a moment," Evelyn wrote, "when I held you and thought, this is not my child." And then, immediately after, but maybe she could be. She called me the unwanted miracle, a phrase that sat in my chest like a stone, not cruel exactly, but not kind either. At the bottom of the letter, in a smaller, more fragile script, she'd written, "Some truths aren't worth the consequences." I folded the page and didn't cry. By spring, Maya and I had decided to share our story. We filmed a short documentary with a local journalism student Naomi knew from her nonprofit work. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. Maya sat beside me on a park bench, talking about the feeling of being the extra piece in someone else's puzzle. I spoke about silence, how it's taught to women like a virtue, like something to treasure. The piece ran in the Sunday edition of a small regional paper. Then the local news picked it up. Then the email inbox started to fill. Strangers who said thank you, who said me too, who said I never knew why I didn't feel like I belonged. Not everyone was kind. Some called it a grab for attention. Some said we should have let the past stay buried. But the point wasn't to be believed by everyone. It was to stop erasing ourselves. In April, I stood at the youth summit in Philadelphia and read from my notes. The podium felt too tall, the room too bright, but Naomi sat front row, hands folded, steady as ever. Aunt Marie was 3 rows back, nodding like she'd known this day would come. I told the students, "You don't owe silence to those who built their peace on your erasure." There was no applause break, just a quiet stillness, the kind that meant people were listening. From the wings, Maya watched, her fingers brushing the locket at her throat. She didn't speak, but her eyes were steady. Later that week, I drove out to the Whitmore house. The sign on the lawn said, "For sale." The windows were bare. The porch light still flickered. I stood in the driveway one last time, then walked to the mailbox and slipped the letter inside. No note, no return address. Some things didn't need to be held anymore. That evening, I sat beside Maya on the porch swing in her backyard. She just planted herbs, basil, mint, rosemary, and the scent carried faintly on the breeze. The sun was warm on our bare feet. Bees flitted through the lavender. No one said anything for a long time. Then Maya reached into a box beside her and pulled out a small photo, a baby in a striped onesie. Big eyes, serious expression. She held it up. "Do you think she ever looked at this and missed you?" she asked. I looked at the photo for a moment. The baby was her, but it could have been me. "Maybe," I said, "but I don't miss her." Maya nodded and neither of us said another word. The swing creaked softly beneath us. 2 women, not lost, not switched, simply found. Sitting beside Maya on that porch swing, with bare feet and the scent of rosemary in the air, I didn't feel like the wrong daughter anymore. I felt like someone who had finally been heard. Some families are built on love, others are built on silence. But even silence has its limit. And when we speak, not to hurt, but to heal, we begin to reclaim what was taken from us. The truth doesn't always set us free right away, but it clears a path. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll share a thought or memory. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most truth, and they deserve to be heard.